I have as my guest Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. He's an American Islamic scholar, based in the US, and he's co-founder of Zaytuna College. He's said to be a proponent of classical learning in Islam and has promoted Islamic sciences and classical teaching methodologies throughout the world. That's what it says on the brief that you might find on your Google search. He's also been referred in the past by The Guardian, a newspaper in Britain, as arguably the West's most influential Islamic scholar, and the New Yorker once called him perhaps the most influential Islamic scholar in the Western world. So there's a congruence between this transatlantic media establishment about your place and your voice. And thank you so much, Hamza, for being here. I want to ask you about the context in which you grew up. I mean, I understand you went to a Greek Orthodox church, that's what you practice as religion, and then you subsequently converted to Islam. Many people talk about conversion and what it does to somebody in terms of their relationship with their religion. Often here we think of them as being overzealous. They tend to be overzealous. You've had a different trajectory. Please tell us. Once were Saul, then you became Paul, if you were Christian, right?
Right. Well, Paul had a conversion experience on the road to Damascus. Right. So conversion is something that happens with people.
From ancient times and modern times. Yeah.
And also Islam spread by the Sahaba were all converts. They moved from paganism into Islam. A few were Christian, but generally they were pagan. Some were Jewish also. So conversion is part of the human story. And it's a powerful experience for people that undergo that experience. We also have awakenings. So people have spiritual awakenings. We have people that might have been born Muslim and they're not really aware of their own tradition, and suddenly they have a spiritual awakening, and then it becomes important to them. So for me, I grew up in California. My mother was very ecumenical. She didn't really impose any specific religion on us. My grandfather, however, was Greek. One of my grandfathers was Greek, and so he was a very important person in the Greek church in California, as well as his father.
Right, and the Greek church is the Greek Orthodox
It's
church.
an Orthodox church, which shares with the Russian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox. The Orthodox is the Eastern form of Catholicism. So the Catholic Church in 1058 split into these two different, the Eastern and the Western churches. So it's very similar to Catholicism. There's some differences.
Right, okay, I know they probably celebrate.
It's like Sunni Shia.
They probably celebrate Easter on a different day.
A different date, yeah.
I do want to ask you though, I mean,
Christmas also is in January.
Is it?
Yeah.
The question of what is it that you bring when you're born? Many people in this country are born into the religious faith. Right. Some of there are, of course, conversions as well. Yeah. But what is it that is there in the experience of the convert, who was once part of a different faith community, of a different belief system? I mean, you've moved within the monotheistic tradition, so maybe the shifts are not so great. But what is it that you feel your background has influenced your thinking about Islam and the way you articulate a vision of Islam?
Well, I think converts bring new blood into a religion. Islam, in fact, in this area, Islam was quite late coming to the area. One of the interesting things about Indonesia and Malaysia is that Islam spread purely by commerce. And so you have a different tenor, I think, the feeling of Islam here. Also, my experience of the Malay personality is that they tend to be, I think, welcoming people by their nature. They're not an isolated people. There's not a kind of subsistic approach to the world. This is a really beautiful part of the world, and I would hate to see the type of religion that has emerged in some parts of the Muslim world, which is very isolationist and exclusivist. It kind of pushes people away. So we have now increasingly Muslims becoming intolerant towards Christians and vice versa. We're seeing Hindus becoming very intolerant towards the Muslims in India. So these are problems with globalization, and I think Malaysia offers us an incredible opportunity for a type of model for the rest of the world, because increasingly now the world is interpenetrating. Your probably ancestors are from India.
Yes, you're very right.
I mean, So you yourself are here, but you're a Malay. I mean,
I'm
you're
Malaysian.
Malaysian, yeah.
So Malay would designate the
ethnic group, right.
category. And I'm of mixed heritage, Roman Catholic on one side and Hindu on the other. I do want to ask you about the context, the American context in which you're converted, and perhaps the rise of Islam as a religion within the American public sphere.
Right.
You know, we have expressions of, say, the Nation of Islam,
Sure.
and all that. I mean, where were you and the America that you grew up in? Was it welcoming of this identity you took
I mean,
on?
the American I grew up in, America was very different. Like, I grew up in largely a white country because I grew up in the 60s. The immigration after 65, which brought a lot of people from places like the Middle East and from India, from Pakistan, that changed America radically over the last few decades. But the America I grew up in, I had one Asian person in my growing up as a child and one African American in my classroom. So everybody else was white. So the America's changed a lot.
And the perception of Islam, how is it coded in America? There was a time, you know, the rise of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad.
Well, first, yeah.
And so on, so Malcolm X.
Sure.
Very political expression of Islam, right?
I mean, first of all, Islam is a very old religion in America. Islam has been there for hundreds of years. We know that African slaves that were brought to America were practicing Islam. Muslims are mentioned by the founding fathers. George Washington actually has somebody who's procuring slaves for him saying they can be Mohammedans or Christians or even atheists as long as they have a good face and good character. So equal opportunity slaver in that case. But Islam is a religion that's been in America, although after 65 many Muslims immigrated. You had an early immigration. Ford, who the famous manufacturer of cars, Ford actually had
the author of the
protocols.
Of the Zion.
So
yeah.
well, he was the one that had it written. Yeah, he commissioned it.
Yeah.
So, but Ford had a problem with alcohol in his factories. Like, he saw the production was lower, and so he wanted people that didn't drink, and so they suggested that he bring Muslims. So a large Yemeni contingent came to the U.S. to work in the Ford factories, and this is why there are certain cities now. This was over 100 years ago. There are certain cities in Michigan, for instance, that have majority Muslim populations. So you're seeing, it's amazing. And now we're seeing also, that's where Rashida Tlaib, the Palestinian, she comes out of that world where a lot of Muslims are there.
So she's a newly
she's a
minted,
congresswoman, right, and Ilhan Omar. Right. So you're seeing now we've got 4 Muslims in Congress. There are many Muslims working in Washington, D.C. If you go into airports now, you see women with the hijab that are part of the security apparatus.
Okay, very quickly, before we go to a break, in the era of Trump, it seems interesting or paradoxical that you have an increased visibility of Muslim representatives, even while the Trump administration seems Islamophobic. How do you account for that?
Well, I think that I don't like the term Islamophobia. Phobia is an irrational fear. I think there's some reasonable concern in Europeans and Americans about terrorism and things like that. In the same way, there's reasonable concern for many Muslims about the aggression of Europeans and Americans in their countries. I mean, what we need to do is recognize that there are genuine concerns that people have. So, but I think in the U.S. overall, Muslims don't experience, I think overall the community actually is thriving in many ways in the U.S.
Okay, we'll take a short break. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned to Let's Talk. Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharad Kuttan. With me, Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. He's the co-founder of Zaytuna College. He's an Islamic scholar. And he also was one of the authors of a document or a letter dated some October 2007 called A Common Word Between Us and You. And it was leaders of the Islamic world reaching out to Christian leaders. Now, it's been, 12 years since that letter went up. Maybe we could begin with explaining to us, why was this letter important? Why was it written in the first place? And then we can talk about its impact.
Well, first of all, the letter came because of the Regensburg speech, where you had Pope Benedict gave a speech arguing in the speech, or at least quoting somebody who said that Islam was irrational. He actually quotes Ibn Hazm about the irrationality of Islam. And so the letter was a response to that. And it was initiated by Amir Ghazi bin Muhammad, he's a Jordanian from the royal family, but very active in interfaith dialogue. And from that, initially the letter was sent to the Vatican, but we didn't get a response. And so
Pope Benedict did not respond.
Did not respond. Well, I don't think he got it. So I think there was people that maybe didn't deliver it to him. But what happened was, this is the backstory that a lot of people don't know. What happened was, it was Miroslav Volf in Yale and Protestants that responded to the letter. And it was a very positive response. And that then in turn caused the Vatican to kind of realize, oh, this letter was addressed to us and we haven't responded. So then they responded. And that led to a really interesting initiative where we meet every 4 years. So there's a Vatican Muslim meeting. The Christians...
It's a meeting of the leadership of churches or faith communities. How does it work? I mean, who exactly is having this dialogue?
It's the Vatican and Muslim leadership.
Right. So what's interesting, because the Vatican is an organization with a very clear structure, and it's a state. Yeah. Yes. Whereas in Islam, you don't have something quite analogous to that. Right. So who represents Islam?
Well,
then?
this is a big problem. I mean, historically, the people that represented Islam were supposed to be the scholastic community of scholars. And it's closer to the rabbinical tradition in Judaism. So you do have rabbis, and you have rabbis, for instance, that represent Judaism. They might be from different groups. So you have like Orthodox rabbis, ultra-Orthodox, you have Reform rabbis, you have conservative rabbis. But they do recognize some type of leadership. Every religion has to have, if it has a normative tradition, in other words, something that says this is what the religion is. Because if it doesn't, then it becomes completely fuzzy and meaningless.
Right. But to the extent that the Catholic Church recognizes its interlocutors, so the Muslims who come to speak to them are recognized as equals, and is that the basis for the conversation?
Well, I think, again, like you said, the Muslims, we can't take on ourselves this idea that somehow we represent the entire Muslim world. But hopefully amongst us are those who represent, for instance, an understanding of Islam. Right now we have competing versions of the religion. So we have extremists who are arguing that we need to fight, and actually terrorism, which is, there's always been sects in Islam that have practiced a type of terroristic approach. The assassins, the hashashin, would kill rulers and things like that. So there's always been that element, and every religion has that. Judaism has that, Christianity has that. But overall, Islam is an Iranic religion, is a peaceful religion, and the Prophet ﷺ himself was peaceful. In fact, there's a beautiful book that just came out recently by Juan Cole, who's a brilliant scholar of Islam in the United States, and it's called Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amidst a Class of Empires. He makes a very compelling argument that the Prophet ﷺ did everything to avoid war, that he was not somebody that he was by far a peaceful man. He was not a warmonger by any stretch. And so this argument somehow that Islam is a belligerent religion, there are Muslims that would like to make that argument, but these are a small minority. Now, 1.5 billion people, a small minority can be tens of thousands of people, which is a problem. But if you look, for instance, Malaysia had a handful of people that unfortunately went to Iraq and to Syria to fight, a very small number. India had less than 30 people that actually went there. If you look at Europe, you had several thousand. So it's quite troubling, the fact that these ideologies have spread amongst European and American Muslims, less so in the United States.
I want to ask you, though, you know, these conversations are so wonderful when you read reports of them, of trying to find commonalities and such, seem to happen at a kind of rarefied level. The question is, even with the Catholic Church, even though they say they represent 1.3 billion faithful, or whatever it is the Catholic population is, the question is on the folk level, on a popular level, are those ideas of ecumenism really trickling down? Are they there on the ground? Is it there in the Muslim world? Is it there in the Christian world? Is there enough conversation?
Well, I don't think there is, and I think we have a lot of people that don't know their religion very well. The Prophet ﷺ never reviled idols. The Quran actually prohibits the attacking of the sensibility, religious sensibilities of other peoples. The Quran is a critical book of polytheism and other religions. It also makes critiques of Christianity, of Judaism, but it warns us, "La tasubbu alladhina yad'una min dunillah." Do not curse the idols of those who worship other than Allah, because they in turn will curse God. And so it's very important that Muslims respect the other faith's right to worship what they worship. We believe, Muslims, our tradition is a tradition that says that Islam has come as a religion for all of humanity. The prior dispensations, these previous religions, came for groups. Like Hinduism is specific to the Hindus. There's a Varna system of it's ethnically determined. The Brahman, the Kashtiya, the Vaishya, the Dalit and Shudra peoples. So this is very much an ethnic religion. Judaism is a tribal religion, although it does have a universal aspect to it in recognizing Noahidic peoples. But overall, it's a religion of a group, Bani Israel. Christianity started as a reformist movement within Judaism, but then became universalized. So the Muslims would argue that Islam is uniquely a universal religion. Although I think Buddhists might take, I think Buddhism, but arguably there are people that say Buddhism is more of a philosophy and a spiritual technology. In fact, some people would argue that Jews can use Buddhism, Muslims can use Buddhism, Hindus can use Buddhism, that there's techniques in there. So Islam is unique in that way, that it really is a proselytizing faith, and it's a faith that it's an exceptionalist faith. That it really sees itself as a new and universal for all of humanity. But despite that, Muslims must respect other religions and the right to reject, because the word in Islam for calling others to Islam is da'wah, which in Arabic means an invitation. An invitation is only valid if you can reject it.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you right there, but we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Stay tuned to Let's Talk. Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharad, and with me is Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. He's co-founder of Zaytuna College. We've been talking about religion, its place in the contemporary world. It seems to me like some of the discussions we had here about religion, and especially extremist forms of violent extremism that sometimes is referred to, is also intertwined with nationalism and identity politics. I do want to ask you, though, I mean, there's been a criticism out there in the world about you, and that has to do with what seems to be a shift in your position, that you have been in the past, especially in the kind of post 9/11 scenario, very critical of autocratic governments in the Muslim world. You yourself referred to the 9/11 hijacking as an act of mass murder and so on and so forth. But in recent times, you seem to become much more comfortable with particular regimes. The United Arab Emirates in particular, there's a case with reference to Egypt, and there's Turkey. How do you take this criticism that you've now become much more willing to give autocratic governments, especially non-democratic governments in the Middle East, for instance, some leeway? You've actually defended them, and so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think governments are a blessing from God. Anarchy is a horrible thing, and I think when we see failed states, like we see what's happening in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and many other places, Libya is a tragedy. Government, to me, is a blessing, but it's also a tribulation, and the best of governments are governments that tend to respect their citizens or subjects, depending on what type of government it is. And the worst are those that disregard the sensibilities of their own population. I'm not happy with tyranny. I'm not happy with abuse of populations, but I also understand the complexities of the world. The world is a very complex place. Now, one could argue that the best position is to remove oneself completely from the apparatus of states. But that also then, you have the problem of who's going to actually give these people advice about how to deal with things? If I had an opportunity now to engage the Chinese government, I would, because I feel like they need advice about handling the problem with the Uyghurs
so
and things like that.
You wouldn't say, well, we need to actually isolate China because of its alleged poor human rights record when it comes to the Uyghurs.
I mean, China's a very complicated place. It's a very difficult place. They're dealing with, unfortunately, the Muslims traditionally were actually a community that had, in some ways, they were exempt from a lot of the problems in China, like the one-child policy. They were allowed to, but because there's been terrorism and things like that emerging, they've overreacted, and it's horrible what's happened, and I would oppose it, but I think governments need advice. And this idea,
whether they're democratic or not democratic doesn't matter to you.
Well, I think, like I said, the Gulf states, for instance, like the UAE, the vast majority of the population is fine with the way the government is running things. And I know that for a fact of just interacting with the people. There are dissidents, undeniably, and in all these states, maybe there's some heavy-handedness about dealing with dissidents, but they also see what's happening around them. In other words, the collapse of these states. So, like I said, it's very easy for us to be armchair critics. I believe in building. I think criticism is important, but it's also can be very dangerous when there's no constructive criticism. It's just simply tearing down everything. We have to work. I mean, I could criticize the Malay government. I could criticize the American government. But in the end of the day, these are what we have. We have to work with them. We have to work towards making a better situation for people. I mean, I want to see the best situation for people. I'm against violence. I've always been against violence. Nobody can find anywhere where I've promoted violence. Like I said, I do not like tyranny. I don't want anybody.
Democrat? I mean, would you be somebody?
I actually like constitutional monarchy as a form of government. I prefer.
This is interesting because
I've always said that. I've never been.
It's a residual.
Like I would have probably been a loyalist in the American Revolution, although I do have ancestors that
you
fought
mean
in the American Revolution to Britain. Yeah, probably. Even though I'm Irish mostly. So
are you? Yeah, and they have a great Republican.
But again, like I look at the Irish situation. You know, the Irish were tribes that were fighting each other. What the British did to the Irish is horrible. 700 years of terror. But in the end of the day, the Irish now are using Robert's rules. They have a parliament. I mean, these things, you have to look at the positive
Okay, I want to ask you this.
Also.
Be a monarchist, it's fine. I mean, it's not.
No,
exactly
I like stability, and I like the idea of having tradition. I like the fact that you have a family that represents something that transcends time.
Okay, but what about this, right? So if you go back to Islamic history and the caliphates, right? Is this where it comes from? Is your sense of the stability, the importance of the monarchy and the continuity, genealogical, is it about the caliphs? Is it about that early tradition in Islam of the caliphs?
I don't think the Prophet ﷺ established a form of government. I think he established a government, but I don't think he established a fixed form of government. I think that's left for the people themselves to decide how they want to be ruled, or you're born into a covenant. So for instance, if you're born into a monarchy, there's a type of covenant. And these are.
But doesn't history tell us it's often betrayed? I mean, we look at the Ottoman Empire and what
the Ottomans were amazing generally. I mean, they're probably one of the most extraordinary pre-modern governments in human history. I mean,
they did have some bizarre practices.
They had some very strange practices, and they had some terrible things. There's no government. The United States, we have extrajudicial killing. You know, the United States assassinates people
with drones.
Exactly. You know, every government has dark downside. It's just not possible. In fact, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan said that government is a tree that must be watered with blood. I mean, this is something that, and that's why I wouldn't want to be in power. I wouldn't want to have to make those decisions, but these are very complicated. Human beings are difficult. We're complicated. We're not easy as a species, you know, and so I think in a place like Malaysia, people should thank God for the government. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that need to be rectified, that need to be redressed. And again, from the Quranic perspective, there is a view that you get what you deserve. In the United States, if we look at the United States, we've become a consumer culture that's very superficial. We don't have an intellectual tradition per se anymore, like I'm talking about the majority of people. So in many ways, Trump reflects a culture. He reflects a type of attitude. I mean, look at Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Look at American Idol. Look at our popular culture and what it says about us as a people. And that's not to deny that we have amazing things. We give the world the Center for Disease Control. If there's an outbreak anywhere, we're the first people to work on it and try to provide cures for these problems. So much good comes from America, but also much harm as well. I mean, this is the world that we live in.
It absolutely is, and unfortunately, the world in which I
live in comes to an end now.
Right
yes.
now. It was been wonderful talking to
great.
you. And I wish we could have had an extended conversation. I must have you back on the show.
Well, television is a superficial medium, so this is what we're
what
stuck
can I
with.
say? I work in it.
God bless.
But thank you very much. I've been speaking
to
Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. He's an American Islamic scholar and co-founder of the Zaytuna College. This has been Let's Talk. I'm Shaykh, only in Astro Wani. Wonderful.